Hello, everyone, and we're back. It's another Friday episode. We're joined again by Elliott. I'm sitting here drinking Russian caravan tea, and I will probably get canceled for saying that. It's blue and yellow caravan tea, but it's giving me hopefully some caffeine to power through. Elliott, how are you doing this Friday evening?
I'm doing well.
That's good. So we've been you and I, Elliott and I, have been talking a lot about this. And I've sort of hinted or did slight teasers, at least last time, about this idea, I guess, that Elliott and I are working on, which we are calling the weird right. Capital W, capital R. Weird in the sense, in multiple senses. Weird in the sense, I guess, first and foremost, that Elliott and I are sort of strange and weird people, so 100% checks. Also weird in the sense of not quite like your standard XYZ, that sense of weird, but also very much so in the realm of sort of Lovecraftian philosophy weird, as in weird fiction. As in using terms from weird fiction, but also just terms in general from pop culture to talk about the right. Obviously, we are not unique in this, and we are not the first people to do this. Many people have done this. This is not in any way unique in that general idea sense, but I do think that, I would bet you that the principles that we're working on that might make up this political philosophy that would be a little unique. But again, lots of people have been doing sort of strange philosophy. Some people that come to mind, of course, are Land, people who followed Land, or at least used to work with Land and then don't like Land anymore. People come to mind like Eugene Thacker, Timothy Morton, Reza Negarestani, people like that. So we're definitely not the first, definitely not our, complete brand new brainchild, but I do think we take a pretty interesting angle on it. So I think what we're going to do today is just sort of generally introduce what we mean by weird right, and maybe hint at some of sort of the various facets of it. Obviously, we're composing a much longer thing that will probably be written and polished and nice, and we'll probably, cannibalize it for several different episodes as we go, but we thought we'd just do sort of an introduction video where we're at kind of right now. So yeah, that's, I guess, as best of a introduction as I can muster on a Friday evening after a busy week. But Elliott, I'll cede the floor as best I can to you and let you riff from there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factions of the right now, which is a surprise to nobody who is right wing. The nice thing about being right wing, though, is unlike the left, who pretends that they're united, the right does not. Right? We have no notion of solidarity, I think. It's interesting.
It's very funny because I was talking to just another progressive the other day, and they're like, I'm so worried about how unified the right is right now, and I was like, do I tell them? Yeah, real together. Oh yeah, very scary. Yeah, when in reality it's nothing like that. And of course, left isn't united either. So,
by all means, of course, right. Yeah. Well, and I think that the left has found, so of course the left is not united by any means, right? However,
it's not ideologically, right?
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. However, the left does seem to have an easier time getting on the same, and this has been described by, I think, Jordan Peterson or what's the mathematician guy who is like did all those papers and stuff, James Lindsay. Both of them kind of talk about how the left has managed to congeal on a common lexicon, which is something that the meme is that, and I think we said this last episode, that the left is pimping their Patreon and that the right is arguing over definitions forever.
Yes. Yep.
And that's just how it is. Like, yep. And so if I can kind of, okay, I'll riff briefly. Obviously, we didn't prepare any of this, but this is the beauty of doing it unprepared, is that I think that maybe people are unclear about what the right is. And so I'll go through kind of what I think about the right, and you can agree or disagree. But essentially, there's a couple of different, it's not necessarily like a clear, crisp definition, but there's a couple of things that in a Bill Engvall sense, if you, then you might be a right winger, right? As opposed to redneck, which, I mean, sometimes go hand in hand. But essentially, a right winger, in my mind, is somebody for whom, and Michael Malice has this, answers the question the following question in a very particular way, right? The question is, you could do this. I'll give you a brief pause so you can think about this for yourself.
For me, okay, yeah, I like it. Put me on the spot.
Have you did this? Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'll pause for you.
Or maybe for the listeners as well, but I'll play along. Yeah.
Right. Are some people better than others?
Yeah.
End of question.
Yeah.
yeah. Right. So if you, and it's very important to just ask that question, only that question, exactly that way, because otherwise it won't work.
Right.
So a right winger might think for a moment, might look at you a little bit like, do I trust you? And then say, yes, duh. Some people are better than others.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas a leftist invariably will give a speech. They'll say, well, I mean, because they're unwilling to admit that hierarchy exists and is natural and is real. And a right winger would say even good sometimes. And so one of the defining factors of right versus left is that the right thinks that hierarchy is natural and ethical, and leftists think that a hierarchy is imposed, unnatural, and evil. Right.
I mean, not all. Yeah. And I think, at least for me, I would say, we're talking about sort of the existence of hierarchies. There are bad hierarchies. I think we're living in a system that's run by bad hierarchies. But yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not like, oh God, a hierarchy must be great, must be right wing. No. Right? Like if you're in the hierarchy of who can outwoke the other person, okay, well that's a hierarchy, but it's a bad hierarchy. But is the hierarchy itself natural? 100%. Yeah.
And I would argue, and it's not to drill too fine a point on it, but basically I would argue that those left wingers are more to the right than some of their other left winger compatriots. Yeah. Right. So there's obviously a gradient. The more, and obviously I'm like somewhat moderate in that way, and I think that so anyway. Point being is that this is one defining feature. Another huge defining feature, I think, is that if you are on and this is where my occultist side comes out, right? If you are looking at the tree of life and you have the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity, right? Or the dexter, the literal right-hand path, or the sinister, the literal left-hand path. If you've heard of left-handed magic, right? The left-hand path, that is the modern left, because it is the pillar of substance and of non-order, right? So it's more interested in the substance of matter rather than the structure or the form of it. And the right, the dexter, is the orderly, the form-based pillar, right? And when you have the alchemical marriage of the two sides, the right and left, you get the middle path, which is where things start to resonate and have a really great time, right? So that's another approach that I have for defining the right and left, which is very ancient at this point.
Yeah. I mean, Christianity is chock full of that too. So
absolutely, this occult stuff came from Christianity or Judaism before that.
Judaism. I mean, it all comes. Yeah, it's sort of that broader Mediterranean world. Yeah, in a historical sense. Yeah, you get like like stories like Cain and Abel. Jonathan Pajot just actually did an interesting series as part of his broader thing with Peterson about Cain and Abel, which I actually enjoyed. And it got me sort of thinking about this episode in a different way. But you also see it too. We've talked a little bit about it a couple of times, but particularly in our episode on Karl Barth and nothingness, right? We threw out the terms of opus alienum and opus proprium. So the rejecting work of God and the sort of right, correct, fulfilling work of God, like what God says yes to, what God says no to, all of these things. It for some reason, I mean, Catholics have it too, but Protestants went gaga for this, and I think it's because of Luther, because Luther went gaga for this. So Lutheran theology has sort of like the right hand kingdom of God, the left hand kingdom of God. It goes on and on and on, and that's ultimately not what we're talking about here. But yeah, there's great historical precedent, I guess, for this distinction. Is how I would say it. So.
So yeah, so then what do we mean by weird, right? So that's the term, right? What do we mean by weird?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of right wingers that are okay. So again, there are I identify as a square, but what do I mean by square, right?
It's hip to be a square.
It's hip. That's what Sesame Street told me, right?
You like Huey Lewis in the News?
Well,
Almost
yes,
Halloween. Come on, good movie. Okay, yeah. Every morning I do 5,000 sit-ups. Yeah. Anyhow, I wish. Continue.
No, of course. So it's so I identify as a square, but what's a square? Well, a square, when you think about a coordinate grid on a plane, right, is the natural object, so to speak, right? It's the thing that fits into that is made out of the parallel lines that naturally occur based on that space. It's the natural coordinate system of that space, so in a certain way. And there's mathy people that might want to quibble with me on that, and I'll say, okay, well, it's a natural coordinate system of orthonormal base, right? And that's what you get for being too nerdy. Don't come at me, bro.
It's like, I'm not your kind of nerd. I'm going to nod my head and go, yes. What you said.
Yeah. Basically, I'm fighting off my own. I'm asserting dominance. I'm like,
we're all simultaneously fighting off our own camps. I get it. I do the same thing.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's like so like if you don't know what an orthonormal base, then shut the fuck up. Anyway, point being is that like in terms of the math people, right? You're not as cool as you think you are. Everybody else, you're cool. Love you. Keep loving math. But point being is that so you think about it is that basically a square is the object that you get when you only consider the sort of quote unquote natural lines in a space or in a surface, right? So in curved space, something that is a square, or like on Earth, think about Earth as a globe. The natural way to define shapes or a line on there is with a great circle or an equatorial line, right? Or a longitudinal line, right? Or sorry, latitude, longitudinal line, the up and down one, right? And so you can define shapes that way, right? And so it wouldn't be quote unquote a square in that case. It would be, some sort of triangle or, whatever the heck. So what I mean by weird in that case is that most people think about the right wing as existing in a flat plane, right? And this really limits the right wing because they have to kind of take sharp right cornered turns in order to get anywhere. Whereas reality is funky, right? It's wiggly. And so, in my mind, the weird right are the squares of reality, but reality being weird itself, that requires you to be weird. So it's the people who are kind of in a Taoist wu-wei sort of situation, trying to find those lines of the earth and follow them, as opposed to forcing the earth to bend to their lines, which is a very leftist perspective and a very not weird right perspective.
Oh yeah, because it seeks to assume that it even assumes that you could sort of supersede the natural hierarchy of the earth is bigger than you, and that geometry exists outside of you and you exist within geometry. We're all subject to the rules of the world, like the world around us. Yeah, and you can't bulldoze every the word of the Lord might be able to raise up valleys and flatten mountains, but you can't, right? You are not. That's not you. You're subject to the world around you. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's what I at least mean by weird right. And then Collin, you're free to elaborate as
yeah. I mean, you always got to cite your sources. I mean, the whole idea. So the ideas are both of ours, but the term is yours. So Elliott, that's Elliott's term, and I think it's great. So I'm running with it. I
think I stole it from somebody else, though. I'm almost certain.
Oh, okay.
But anyway.
Well, people got angry, Willie Nelson, right, one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, said, people got angry. They're like, hey, Willie, these people are stealing from you. He's like, well, of course they steal from me. I steal from everyone. So that's kind of my, in the world
mediocre artists borrow, great artists steal.
Yeah, pretty much. We're all living in the philosophy soup, the world of the hyperreal. We're all just swimming around here. So,
exactly.
We're drawn from the same source. I think, so the framing I had never heard of, really, until you had dropped that on me. So, I mean,
Fair enough. Okay.
Since then, it doesn't mean I have some ideas about what it might mean, but a lot of it is like, I guess, for me, I don't have quite a fine point on it as you do, probably because I'm the loosey-goosey humanities guy and you're the
exactly.
the ones and zeros math guy. And so I'm Charlie from Always Sunny with the flow chart. That's kind of my thought process, for better or for worse. It's sort of insane, but the line between insanity and intelligence is sometimes quite fine. So that being said, and speaking of weird, and most of Lovecraft's characters on the border between insanity anyhow, or with the border with insanity anyhow. So hey, we're in good company. I think for me, the way I'm thinking about it right now is Weird Right affirms the existence of hierarchies, does not necessarily affirm every single hierarchy that's the issue in general, is that the right believes in hierarchies but disagrees on which hierarchies are important. So that's a huge problem, right? Like philosophically for the right. The left has it too, but as we already pointed out, they're so pragmatic they don't really care. I don't think the solution for the right is to go down that route and just stop caring, and be hyper pragmatic, because there was this sort of mid-century movements that were hyper pragmatic and killed a lot of people. And so,
and the issue is too much pragmatism in a right-winger perspective actually brings you out of line with nature, which is a little bit bizarre. But
that being said, I think sort of the issue is, you come from a right leaning perspective, but you just take a different tack. So you're heading in the right, but you're like, everyone, these people are doing it this way, the trad cats are doing it this way, the paleocons are doing it this way, right? There's all the different sort of threads, and I could keep going on about all the different ways of getting there to this place. But I was thinking when you were talking about math, because math is more of an idea to me than something I do, because I'm just not very good at it. And speaking of weird and Lovecraftian, maybe we could be called the non-Euclidean right. So
exactly.
Trad right is like, you take these steps to this place and right angle turns, and then you're there, and you're like, well, okay, but that's not really working, because we're up against people who don't care about your right angle turns. Pun intended.
And the world is no longer right angular turns. Right.
Whether it ever was is maybe a completely different discussion. I would question whether it ever was, but
of course,
let's say it was. Let's say it was for sake of argument. Okay, that's clearly not where we are now. I would say that in line with people who the OG weird right people, I'm thinking people like Moldbug and Land here. Weird right, it doesn't use sort of like it deconstructs deconstructionism. So it's like, okay, you got these deconstructionists who want to break everything down and atomize everything, right? Whether it be individuals, ideas, traditions, whatever, right? Everything must be deconstructed, everything must go, everything must be queered, whatever that means. I think, at least for me, the direction I'm going right now is, well, the weird right, this is not even a definition of the weird right. This is just sort of the MO of the weird right. But, in many ways, you are what you do, and you are how you do the thing you do. So that's also important. It's like, okay, you're going to like attempt to uncork, the bottle on chaos. It doesn't mean we go in and follow chaos, but it means, okay, this is a chaotic world now. It's been uncorked. Well, we're going to have to move to the right in directions and patterns and ways that the people on the left will not recognize, or maybe will recognize falsely as left. And people on the right probably will also go, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense, because it's not my way of doing it. But as we've already talked about, the issue with the right is that there's so many different strands and they all care about definitions, which is important, but it doesn't get you anywhere. So again, it's this fine line you have to walk between not falling into pure pragmatism, because that is a trap, and that is very, very dangerous. It's provable with math. You can prove that that's
Well,
very.
it's dangerous
But at the
for
same time,
right wingers, I
yeah,
think, and the reason why, and so another version of right wing and left wing, just to kind of continue to separate this out, is that left wingers, and I kind of realized, I was like, aha, it finally makes sense because when left wingers talk about capitalism, it's almost like they're talking about like some sort of spiritual entity. When they talk about like capitalism wants this, I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. It's not a thing. But actually, for left wingers, it is a thing, because they begin with abstraction and then they particularize down. This is why intersectionality was such a huge breakthrough for them, because it allowed them to actually manifest in reality. Whereas right wingers begin with particulars, right? You'll always hear right wingers versus a left winger saying, I am here, you are here. Right. And the left wingers are like, how do you know that here is here? Right. And the right winger is like, are you fucking kidding me? Because the right winger begins with particularity and then abstracts on top of that. So for a right winger, the humanity is mildly faker than me or my family, right? Because my family is something I can see here. I can't see humanity, so it's abstractly, you know, a thing potentially.
Right. No, I agree. And the real point I was trying to get to, but I always take, again, as I say, it takes me minimum of a paragraph to say a thing that you can say in 2 words. So this is just, we have different ways of communicating. I'm a bit like C.S. Lewis in this. He just wouldn't shut up. It just kept going and going and going. C.S. Lewis is great, but it just kept going and going and going and going and going. He was known for this. Not to say that I am anywhere near as smart as C.S. Lewis, but I think from all the descriptions I've read of him, I think kindred spirit, maybe. Endless qualifications. Hey, that's a right-wing thing. What I mean by this is this. What I mean by that, say the thing. So there's this real danger of right-wingers falling into pragmatism. But I think the weird right for me in terms of its motivation is kind of what we talked about last time. It's like taking the idea of minimum viable religion, but then saying, now what can you do with that to galvanize people who care about the true, the good, and the beautiful? And guess what? A lot of people actually do care about the true, the good, and the beautiful. That might mean something different to them than it does to you. But if you look at them with any ounce of charity in your heart, you can recognize that they still care about these concepts of truth, good, beauty. The left does not. So you may have to, there might be some, you maybe have to bite your tongue on some things. If you recognize that, okay, somebody else in the same space, the general right, cares enough about these things, I can find common resonance with that. And I probably will disagree with them on 5,000 other things. But guess what? We don't want the other person gone. We don't want the other person removed. We just want to live a peaceful, happy, productive life. So, and why is that weird? Well, because it cuts through and across all these hitherto very, in some ways there's real distinctions between groups on the right, but there's also a lot that binds us together. So and because it's a right-wing idea, it does not seek to erase differences at all, but you can still find commonality, at least common themes. Different versions of right-wing thought can rhyme. I know that this is not a very math thing to say, but that's why I'm the humanities guy. They can rhyme, they can have poetic resonance. And the world is not always one way, and you can't, as you said, you can't right angle your way into a better future. It's just not in this world, at least. It's not going to work. You're gonna have to. It doesn't mean you bend on principles. It means you find common principles that you all really care about, and you do those things. That's what it means to me, at least. So.
And so this particular one actually began, I think this particular exercise began when you and I were talking about, this is a segue, when you were talking about, I brought up this notion that the left is pointed forward in time and the right is pointed backwards in time. And that's when we're like, okay, we got this freaking figured out in terms of the beginning of a weird right manifesto.
Yeah. Don't say manifesto. It's not a manifesto.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's not.
Sorry.
It's not a manifesto.
Principles.
It's the
Yeah, yeah.
principles. It's just.
Yeah, you're right.
It's
Right.
an open letter. Principles. It's not a manifesto. Do as Yarvin recently said, the instant you say manifesto, bad things start happening. It's not a manifesto.
It's true. It's true. It's not a manifesto.
It's
You're right.
not a
You're
manifesto
right. My bad.
At all. It's more of like my mind vomited on the page and we mixed it together and it's great. Which is weird.
By the way, I would actually say Deleuze is probably the first weird writer, at least right winger, in terms of what I understand. Because lefties say if the right ever figures out Deleuze, like we're completely fucked.
Yeah, and that'll add it to my list of things to read. I have not yet had time to do the Deleuze. I'm,
no, he's a pain in the butt.
Slowly chipping away at the other things. Yeah, it's you can't know it all. You just can't. You can't read it all.
Nah.
Try. Yeah. But maybe I'll have
I'm getting close to him.
I'll have to bump him up in my sort of list.
Yeah, it's 1,000 Plateau, or sorry, it's Capitalism and Schizophrenia is the book to read from him, as far as I understand. So yeah.
Yeah, but anyhow, so yeah, that's I guess a general introduction to the idea of what we're trying to go for with the weird right. Of course, we're hashing out the details. So obviously we're in the process of doing that, but Elliott, did you want to pick one of our favorite principles we have so far and just kind of roll with it? Again, loosey-goosey style?
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you pick. Which one do you like so far? Because I have my favorites, but I'm more interested in what you think is your favorite.
Well, of course, I'm trying to be polite here, right? So I'll try to pick one of yours that are not one.
Oh, no. Man, I do this because I do this for the lulls and for the fun and for the joy of inquiry. I don't pick whatever one you like so far.
Okay. Why don't we? There's what I think is the most important one, but also I think there's a hilarious one. This is one I wrote, which is based off of your Lutheran or Luther inspired. If God is dead, he resurrects himself in unexpected places. That inspired me. With saying God died on the cross of the Enlightenment, but he is resurrected. The foundations of the queered, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical-theoretic Tower of Babbel crack as resurrected logos harrows hell.
I will say, very good and quite poetic in that strange Gen X kind of way. That was very poetic. I don't know if you were shooting for that, but it was incredibly poetic. So.
Well, I mean, insofar as land is poetic, I mean, because I'm totally trying to. There's bits where, I'm trying to copy some of Land's totally opaque continental, overwrought style. But there's also ways in which that style I have found when I read it kind of pop off non-linear thoughts, almost because the way that we think about thinking a lot of ways, and this is relevant, is one thought at a time. And I think that people think that creative people are thinking in a line. They're like, oh, I got from point A to point B by thinking about point A 1 1/4, point A 1/2, point A 2/3 or 3/4, and then boom, I ended at point B. And it's no, what happened is you thought of point A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, there's actually a connection between A and B. And you're like, but is it from B to A or A to B? Let's think about that, right? And so then there is a connection from A to B for sure, right? And so this sort of weird poetic way of expressing things allows, it's kind of what I started to appreciate with icons, right? Or Renaissance type semi realist, but also highly symbolic paintings that allows you to have non-linear thoughts, which is what we have to do as right wingers in terms of viewing the universe, because the universe is non-linear in a lot of ways. And I don't just mean non-linear in terms of squiggly. I mean it's got multiple dimensions going on at the same time too. So I think that's a great place to start, honestly.
So let's unpack. You
have thoughts on that too. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, that's really quite beautiful, I think. And I'm not just gushing. I was like, damn, that's really well said. And I know it's interesting because hey, so sorry. Speaking of weird right and people getting together who are not and fighting together who are not necessarily agreed. We come from very different camps. I mean, Elliott and I have radically different spiritual worldviews, I guess you'd say, but
Yeah, probably.
we share a lot as well. And that is also a weird right. We are sort of, at least I'm attempting to be an embodiment of the weird right, that like, look at that. You can have severe disagreements, but also lots of agreements. And
Also, like fundamentally different worldviews, because you're
yeah,
coming from a Orthodox Christian perspective in terms of Lutheranism, right?
Lowercase o Orthodox. Yeah.
Nicene Creed accepting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We'll say it
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
Not Eastern Orthodox, but yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course, and not
Yeah.
even Western Orthodox, but that's another thing. Point being, and I'm coming from like a deeply occult perspective, right? Like alchemical, and that's relatively new to me. I haven't always been an occultist, but you know, in a certain way, like diametrically. Not necessarily opposed. I mean, the alchemists, I don't think have ever been opposed to the Orthodox people. The Orthodox people who came up with the word heresy, you know. But it's fair enough. You got to protect the sheep, and I get it. Like, alchemy is not for normies,
Well,
so fair enough.
who's heresy? Because I mean, who's heresy? Because there's a lot of people who call Lutherans heretics. So,
oh, that's true. That's true.
Who's
that's
heresy?
True. So, right. But yeah.
But anyhow,
that's our hugely. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So you were, as somebody who's coming from not my tradition, ended up writing something quite theologically profound that I really enjoyed. So let's take it apart. Let's deconstruct it, but
exactly
with the intention of showing you not to break it apart, but to show how great it is and how the little parts work together.
Right.
Yeah. So God died on the cross of the Enlightenment is the first bit, which I think anyone who's at least vaguely, even just non-leftist, kind of sort of gets, right? Like objective spiritual reality aside, regardless of your spiritual and or religious beliefs or lack of them, I think that's sort of just a thing. You can look at any cursory Western history from the Enlightenment up to now and go, yeah, I think that's sort of true. Right, like you don't even need to go and read Nietzsche, although you can, to see that. It's like, oh well, yeah, like yeah, the place that God had in, and God meaning any sort of concept of transcendent religious anything in the West has really been continually crucified, like over and over again. Because anytime anyone has any sort of subscribes to any view like that, they tend to get looked down on. I mean, I see this. I don't need to go into examples, but having inhabited the world of academia for a while, this happens all the time. People were skeptical. Here's an anecdote, but it's from my own life. People were that illustrates this. People were very skeptical that I almost was not allowed by my dissertation my dissertation committee to write my dissertation, because they realized that I was like, well, I want to write on the Reformation and Lutherans. Like, great, and then it came out that I was one, and they freaked out because what? You're I'm like, holy shit, really? I had to like convince them, like, oh yeah, I can write about my own camp, my own tribe. I'm like, what? That's just one example of this, and I mean, that's just anecdotally, but it's happened. It was very strange.
That's fascinating how much academia requires itself to be outside the system of examining, by the way.
They said you'd be too biased. And my response was a more polite version of, aren't you biased against Lutherans because you don't understand it like I do?
Right. Like, it's sort of like, it's trying to, I mean, I actually literally can't believe that was their response in a certain way, because I would be like, well, because you would think that given the anthropological perspectives that they have, which is like, oh, you're not supposed to come in as an outsider fully, but you're also not supposed to affect fully. So you need to deeply engage with the community. So from an anthropological perspective, they say the ideal anthropologist from a society is somebody who is from that culture and then understands anthropology enough to then go back and do anthropology on their own culture. And so it's freaking hilarious.
Yeah, I know, it's really hilarious. The double standard there, right? The double standard.
Yeah.
The double standard there. Yeah. were I writing about some other group in a non-Western part of the world, that would have been a non-issue. But anyhow, that's all I'll say. Yeah, that's just an example of like, okay, so this is an outgrowth. This idea, this anecdote is an example of an outgrowth of this Enlightenment idea that you must be completely removed from stuff and just deal in pure reason and pure rationality, which is whoever has been able to do that is who? No, you can't.
Well, and this is where it's really interesting, right? Because the Enlightenment project begins with empiricists, right? Now, it's kind of funky because I'd be interested to know if people think that Newton is an Enlightenment thinker or not, because Newton was, I would think, one of the last Renaissance thinkers, is what I would think, because he was a deep alchemist.
Yeah, and his code behind the Bible thing is very Kabbalistic and very,
he saw himself first as an alchemist, and then physics was a side project, or a theologian, right?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that he's been so whitewashed, and that like sort of Enlightenment, Sam Harris types, will New Age will look up to him, and I'm like, this dude was like seeing.
He was in our side, dude.
He was seeing the world in an objectively spiritual sense, and I mean that like objectively and like totally, but also like objectively, like the world for him was not this like disenchanted material thing. Like it was like God was present in the world, God created the world, he was finding evidence for that, and he was found more and more evidence for everywhere he looked. He found more evidence for that. I mean that but nobody mentions that, of course, because you can't have one of your star people be somebody who was religious or not atheist, at least. I'm not certain of Newton's religious exact I don't know. I don't know about his.
I mean, I'm sure he must have been Anglican, right?
Yeah, Anglican. Yeah.
He went to Oxford, right?
Yeah, or at least Anglican adjacent. I mean, something like that. So, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
So one last point. Very important on the cross, right? Because this is what's wonderful about this. Actually, by the way, is that Collin and I did not at all coordinate on this question. I wrote it, and then he understood these things, right? So it's fantastic. I love it. The other thing I would say is that, so that's the Enlightenment part. So cross of Enlightenment means, right, like in terms of the Enlightenment was a crucible upon which Christ died again, right? Which should not be at all controversial to any Christian whatsoever, because every time you take communion, you are either remembering or literally reconjuring the death and resurrection of Christ. So calm down, everybody. Or Easter, by all means. Right. So firstly, and then secondly, so the cross.
Every Sunday is a mini Easter.
Yes.
Your parish priest reminds you. Yeah. Don't you know?
Right.
Yeah.
which he ought to, right? So and then which he ought to if he's a priest. If you don't do priests, then it's okay for them to do one. But anyway, point being is that then the cross has always, the cross is descendant from a couple of different symbols. It's descended from like the sun sign, the earth sign, which has a little plus and a circle around it. So that is one version of the cross, which is extremely ancient. It's descended from the Ankh, which is also a cross. Well, the Ankh is specifically a human form, and the cross is in some ways a human form. And what does that symbolize? It symbolizes the horizontal version of the cross is kind of the earth, the interaction of beings all on the same earthly plane, and then the up and down axis represents God, shining light. Is one version, certainly amongst occult circles, that the cross is, and anthropologically speaking, there's good evidence that people thought about the cross like this. So what do I mean by the cross of enlightenment? I literally mean that God died because, Nietzsche was right that we overthought God entirely. And you see even that modern biblical literalists still continue to crucify Christ on the cross.
Evangelicals are very guilty of this. And I mean, hey, as an ex-evangelical, like I would not I'm an adult convert. I would not have converted. I mean, I'm grateful for them in that respect. But I will say that, man, the theology is just, yeah, they're operating they're like, we're going to Enlightenment harder because we hate the Enlightenment so much. And I'm like, bruh, just stop enlightening. And they're like, no, we're going to do it more. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, goodbye. Because there's like no way to stop, right? Like they're just going to do it more and do it harder. And they're wondering
and again,
why are we getting more cringe? I'm like, well, maybe they don't think that. Maybe they think they're doing great. I don't know. I mean, the rest of the world
they
doesn't
do
take
think
you.
they're doing great. Well,
What's
so and again, here is
Yeah.
it's very deep. It's very deep. It's ridiculous. So one thing is that the what I mean by over rationalization is that there was this movement in like around the time of Kierkegaard, basically, where everybody was obsessed with finding literal scientific explanations for everything in the Bible. So they're like, oh, the eclipse, there wasn't an eclipse that happened on when Christ was crucified, but an eclipse could have been simulated by a volcano being blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, oh my God, like, dude,
Yeah.
all of these stories happen in mythical space and mythical time. It doesn't, go ahead.
Kierkegaard quite rightly called those people out and sort of mercilessly trolled them because it was just so ridiculous to what was going on. Yeah, like
and those are the forefathers of the evangelicals, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, evangelicals come out of this hyper rational, this particular kind of Protestantism. You know, when like, all the love to Tradcasts, when they get angry at Protestants for Enlightenment, I'm like, well, you're partially right. I'm not going to disagree with you. But the problem is that there was not one Reformation and there was not one Protestant. And so you can make an argument, well, that's the nature of Protestantism. Yeah, to a certain extent. But like, hyper-rationalist Protestants of the 1830s are really nothing like, like neo-Orthodox Reformed thinkers of the 1940s. I'm thinking like Karl Barth here. Like those are very different strains of Protestant thought. Like they're not the same thing. It's this issue too with like monikers, right? You're a Protestant. I'm always like, what does that mean? Like, can you define that for me? So that bugbear aside, yeah, it's there, but there was this problem. The thing that nobody points out is that Protestants at the time also reacted quite strongly against it. This hyper rational, we gotta, I find the dinosaur bones, it must be Leviathan. You're like, okay,
exactly.
Yes,
so cringy,
but,
bro.
all right. I don't really know what that does for us theologically, but
because it sealed the death of God, right? Like as opposed to like, because it forced people into stupid positions like young earth creationism that then are very clearly disprovable, and then all of a sudden people are having crisis of faith over what doesn't matter at the end of the day.
I mean, and many people have argued this is not my unique idea, but I think what we're saying right here is that there's a 100% connection between like young earth creationism and new atheism.
They're the same 100%. People.
It's the same people at different stages. It's the same people at different stages. Yes. Yeah. No.
So that is and then finally the last thing of the cross of enlightenment here is that, or at least the last thing I could think of right now, and I'm sure other people can find other stuff, but basically that for the Christians that are sitting here thinking this whole time, well, God is not dead, right? He's still alive in my heart. And I'm like, really, is he though? Because here's the thing: is that when you look at when you judge the medievals for burning people at the stake or executing people in general, you're really not thinking hard enough about your stance on hell. Because if you think that hell is a real place and that people go there if they don't confess to God, and if they go there and if they die in a state of non-sin, right? So they die in a state of sin, right? So they then the medievals were fantastically merciful, because what they would do is they'd torture people until they confessed God and they got a communion, and then they kill them on the spot so that they could not sin again. So they were ensuring that people went to heaven. So if that's not your worldview, God might be dead for you. Another thing is that if you don't think that God intervening in everyday life, causing miracles and stuff, God might be dead for you. If you're a deist, or you think that the universe is fundamentally mechanistic and that God isn't doing miracles in everybody's lives and stuff, God might be dead for you, right?
Yeah, maybe. I will say,
Sure.
just nota bene, we do not support the burning of people at stake, nor the torturing of people. Elliott is just making a point. Yeah, so
correct. Well, yeah, burning of there's way more humane ways to send people to heaven. But anyway.
Anyhow, no, and I will also point out, as a scholar of religious history, that is one particular kind of medieval Christian.
Correct.
And there was actually a huge disagreement at the time about whether you should do anything to supposed heretics or witches. And actually there were a fair number of very reasonable voices from the church saying, no, you shouldn't. So there's never just one opinion. We tend to look back at the past and say it was this way. And that's like, yeah, but that's one slice of a whole time period, anyhow. That's my sort of, I must add a little bit of course, I must add some salt to that, just a little bit there. Yeah.
Well, and of course the point being, though, is that if you ask your average Christian, they agree more with the worldview of a new atheist than they do with the worldview of any medieval Christian, regardless of whether that
I totally agree on. That is 100% true. That this is an issue. Because I am weird right and not trad right, I simultaneously don't really totally fit in. I mean, I'm not Catholic, but I don't really fit in sort of like the trad kind of, even trad Protestant stuff. I just, maybe it's because I'm an adult convert. Culturally, I just didn't grow up in a church. So I don't have like all of those, I don't want to say trappings, that's probably a harsh term, but I don't have that accoutrement in my background. But at the same time, I will say sort of the modern Prague Catholic, Prague Protestant, I'm like, golly, I mean, they sound a lot like, yeah, you're right, like new atheists. I'm like, do you care? Do you care at all? Or do you want to hear a nice organ play on Sunday? Because I can listen to organ music on Spotify, right? Like, I don't go to, I mean, I want a little bit more. Not everyone needs to be obsessively into the stuff that I'm into, but, and I'm not saying most people don't. I think it's just, it's like culturally, it's just okay to be kind of like, oh, we're just here to be good people. And I'm like, are we though? Because I feel like we're here to recognize that we're not good people. But maybe that's just me. But yeah, that idea that we'll just be good people. I mean, that is it's a very Enlightenment kind of view of what religion is. It's like,
right.
Yes. But it implies that you, like, can't you be a good person without this? And the answer, of course, is yes. Right. Like, I mean, I don't know, like, is that what it's about?
Not to continue to be distracted, but Christ himself said, call me not good, right? Because there is only one good, and he is in heaven, right? And it's like, wow, that's pretty ball, you know what I mean? That's pretty ballsy for like the son of God.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, God who voluntarily humiliates himself,
right?
Which is the cross, son, right? which is the cross. The ultimate example is the cross, right?
Exactly. So anyhow, to go past the comma, right? Yeah. So God died on the cross of enlightenment, comma, but he is resurrected.
Yep.
And the thing is that I think a lot of Christians get nervous when they think God might be dead, that he'd be dead forever, and then they forget that God can self-resurrect, like that literally Christ conquered death.
They forget that it's the central tenet of the faith.
They literally do. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't get
the central tenet of the faith is like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, actually.
Yeah.
But he is resurrected. And he has been, but he is in a state of perpetually being resurrected, is what I understand it to mean.
Yeah, and I mean, there's great theologians far surpassing who will always, I mean, I can never attain that level of knowledge and writing ability, have written a lot about this, right? Like, this is the perpetually dying and rising Lord, right? This is, as Tolkien would say, right? This is sort of the, the Osiris myth, but for real, right? This is the God who is dying and resurrecting every day to keep the world going, but like for real, like who was a person and God, and that's sort of the Christian claim. Is not that all you other religions are don't have access to the truth. It's like we have the real truth, capital T, and his name is Christ. That's the Christian claim. which is a bold claim, but it's like a lot of people, you've talked about sort of like the centrality of cross type motifs across different cultures and time. And yeah, like, of course, like myths have always sort of dealt with this idea of perpetual resurrection. Death and resurrection, the cyclical nature of the world, the seasons, right? It's all like, it's like baked into our existence, right? We ourselves will die, but then, if we have children, we see them grow up. It's like, oh, life continues. It's sort of it's
die to yourself daily that you may be reborn, right?
Yeah. And again, this for me is just a, yeah, for sure. But I know that might rubs some people the wrong way. I think just because I think they maybe view it as just sort of another sort of attack upon just any notion of religion, particularly Christian religion. But I mean, I don't know. I think people misinterpret that. So we've very much clarified that that's not what we mean. We mean it in actually like the small O Orthodox sense of like the Nicene Creed sense of like died, buried, resurrected kind of sense of that. So yeah. And again, Elliott says this, and Elliott's not even Christian too. So again, we're being very weird right now. This is very weird. Yeah, but that's
no. Like I'm like I can say this while being a totally confident occultist, right? Like no worries, because the thing is that all of this shit is true for most occultists, right? Like even occultists recognize that the Enlightenment was really good because it, in some ways, because it allowed us to think more precisely. But the project of the Enlightenment also brought with it a lot of despiritualification, so to speak, of our everyday life, which kind of is a precursor to nihilism in everyday, Yeah,
there's actually a word for this in religious studies called the disenchantment of the world. Yeah,
literally the disenchantment. Yeah, right. And it's interesting. I love how I didn't even know this was a term. Yeah, fantastic, because it implies the base state is the enchantment, which is fucking true.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. No. Yes. Like in German, this is called Entzauberung. This is just because I live in. Some Germans, theorists have also written about this. Disenchantment is the English word. Yeah, it implies that the default state was and always kind of has been enchantment. That is the human state. There is no, as Aaron McIntyre would say, there is no secular society. It's just not possible. You can't have truly secular people. It doesn't work. Humans will make stuff. I mean, it's natural. It's as natural as breathing. Let's not forget that, like, the connection between, like, even just the etymological connection between words for breathing and words for the divine or religion. I mean, it's like spirit, for example. Like, it's just it's everywhere, across all sorts of different cultures who had no contact with each other in the past. It's there. I don't know. This is the natural state of mankind, is to be spiritual or religious or mythological, however you want to define those things. That's the natural state. So there's something which implies, and I'll let you have the floor, but this implies that there's something unnatural about the Enlightenment. So it did something unnatural.
Yes, it is indeed unnatural, because Kant, kind of the poster child of the Enlightenment, and Hegel were both trying to transcend reality, both materially and spiritually, right? So okay, we'll continue going with the quote.
Yeah, keep going. So the next I'll read the next sentence, and then you can react to it. Okay,
go ahead.
The foundations of the queered, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical-theoretic Tower of Babbel crack as resurrected logos harrows hell. Okay.
So this is obviously a very Landian-inspired hell, or a Landian-inspired sentence, right?
We already live in a Landian hell, so you keep going. That's the world. Yeah.
Right. Like, unfortunately, I'm a beer in, so there's an accident. But if I was pretending to be smart, that would have been purposeful. Regardless,
yes.
Point being is that to laugh and say a couple times like Armin. A point being is that I want to start with this again, non-linear sentence. You'd think, oh, you're going to start with the foundations of, and then no, I'm going to start with, notice the Tower of Babel. We'll start there. So the Tower of Babel obviously is a pivotal Christian myth, right? And I say myth in
Judeo-Christian.
In the Judeo-Christian, pivotal Judeo-Christian myth, correct, right? In terms of what is the Tower of Babel primarily about? It's about humans who are unified by one language and said, oh my God, we're so cool. We're going to build a tower to heaven from earth to go see God. God looks down and says, ha, that would totally suck if humans got to our level. I'm going to confuse their speech so they can't do this project anymore, thus destroying the tower. Now, hold that thought, because we also have, in my mind, the Tower card from the tarot, which is card 16. Okay, and the Tower is frequently seen as a really rough card in your life, right? If you're doing a tarot reading and the Tower comes up, a lot of like sort of faux or like scammy tarot readers are going to say, oh, this is the bad one. You think the devil is bad, you think death is bad, the Tower is the bad one. But really, the Tower card, and there's a lot of Kabbalah around this, right? But the Tower card just means disillusionment, right? At the end of the day, it just means that you saw the world one way. That ivory tower of your mental notion of the way the world was is broken and can now be made anew. You are now capable of building the real tower. And there's sort of lightning bolt breaking the tower, which again is brilliant because Zeus and the Christian god Yahweh, both being storm deities initially that became henotheistic deities, and then of course Yahweh became a monotheistic deity with all the other gods being demoted to demons and angels. And if you're Christian, you disagree with that, that's fine, right? But from a
religious history perspective, I mean, theologically, I would disagree, but from a religious history perspective, like, yeah, many Christians, Elliott, are actually okay with looking at, we can separate like theology, what we spiritually believe to be true, from like how beliefs progress over time.
No, of course.
I'm not evangelical. Okay, yes, keep going.
No, right. So, the Tower card, if you're familiar with the Kabbalistic tree of life, or if you're not and you want to look it up, the tower, look up the paths between the tree of life and notice that the tower is the path that connects the bottom Sephiroth, or the bottom sphere of the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity together. It's the boundary between the material plane, the astral plane and the ethical plane. So the mental plane and the plane above that, right? And there's a lot of, it's too compact. Go read the Chicken Kabbalah if you want to understand everything of what I'm saying, and I'll stop there with that. And also go look up the Rider-Waite tarot deck, the Tower card, to kind of see some of the symbology going on there that is beyond just the Tower of Babel. Go read the Tower of Babel, obviously, too, right?
No, as somebody who's very much who thinks a lot about language, and the power of language, anyone who watches this channel will know that. Tower of Babel is one of those stories that kind of does, I mean, of all the stories contained in the Bible, that one really sticks in my brain and keeps there and is there, because it's all about what language allows you to do, both good and bad. And language as a tool that's sort of neutral. It's like, how are you using it? And then what happens when you lose common language? Like, what does that do to people's cultures, traditions, anything, right?
So, and notice that the Enlightenment is obsessed with creating a common language. It's obsessed with bringing everybody into the same linguistic metaphysical universe through language, firstly, and secondly math and science, the metric system.
Well, which is interesting, because this is making me think. This is just a riff, but since this is a riff episode, I think in some ways it's safe to say, the Enlightenment comes out of the Reformation. I mean, I'm not gonna argue with people on that, right? But it's interesting because sort of what is the rallying cry of the Reformation, at least the Lutheran Reformation, is ad fontes, to the source, right? So like the Reformation was about going to source languages and then translating and then disseminating into the language of the people. It was never about enforcing a monotone, a mono language. It was never about that. So it's interesting to me because you're making me think, because the Enlightenment really is sort of the opposite of that. It's like, okay, yeah, great, you can translate the Bible, great, people can have access to it, okay, fine, but like, let's get back to this like single language thing before the Tower of Babel. Like, can we recover that somehow, right?
And so that we can go to the moon, so that we can build a literal tower that we rocket off of Earth.
Right. And anyone who reads the myth with a little bit more insight is like, wait, did you not hear the ending? Because it's sort of a warning as well. Like most myths, right? It's like it happens, or it happened within mythic space, but then also is kind of continually happening, right? Just like Christ is sort of continually dying and being resurrected, sort of that idea. It's like, well, maybe there's continually a Tower of Babel happening here. Maybe we need to be really careful about that. But the Enlightenment doesn't care. Like, well, no, that's not important to us, right? We're going to take the story in this case completely out of context and just do what we want with it. Why did everything go wrong? Well, you took it out of, you didn't care about the ending at all. Yeah, there was an ending. Sorry, that's my rant. Go.
Yep. Nope. That's a great rant. So now we've gotten Tower of Babel out of the way, right? Now let's jump to Harrow's Hell, which I would actually invite you, Collin, to speak on. Go ahead.
Harrowing of Hell, if I may, is my favorite part of the Easter celebration, the Triduum, the 3-day Easter celebration. Harrowing of Hell is my favorite. You're
going to know this way better than me, so you go.
Okay, this is just so obviously, as resurrection is the most important in terms of like eschatologically, theologically, of course. But I love the Harrowing of Hell because it's so freaking metal. Because Christ descends. I should start talking like Jordan Peterson. He descends into the underworld. No, he really, he descends into Hades, right? So Harrowing of Hell is the English way we say it. Hell. We tend to think of hell as a colleague of mine once described it as, modern Americans view hell, which is as a combination of Dante's Inferno and the Dilbert cartoons, which is actually pretty true. Even like Christians, oftentimes their view of hell is really not informed by a whole lot of not even like church fathers or anything. It's mostly just a lot of pop culture works its way in there, and that's fine. Bill and Ted go into hell, and it's a whole thing. It's an excellent adventure.
And hell is a lot more similar to Tartarus than it is to Hades, right? And of course, look up the Jehovah's Witnesses opinions on hell, and you'll actually get a pretty decent rundown of
So this is, and I'm not an expert I'm not a biblical scholar expert, right? But so I can only go from my sort of informed, well-educated, informed believer's background. I have a degree in religious history, not in like theology per se. But I can't say that so the Harrowing of Hell is what happens, for people who don't know, is that in any Christian tradition that is not hyper modernized, so basically like traditional Protestants, definitely Roman Catholics, and definitely Eastern Orthodox, so for the vast majority of Christian history, the idea is that Christ dies on the cross, so Good Friday, descends into hell. This is in the Nicene Creed, so it's in the creed, and essentially frees the faithful from the power of hell. Now,
the faithful who could not have been baptized.
Right. Well, actually, there's very
okay, fair enough.
I'm not going to get into. That's a whole other episode, man. Just can of worms everywhere. Okay.
One huge swath of this, folks, is humans, like pre-Jesus Jewish, right?
That's one strain. He rescued the simplest way to say it that does not alienate different interpretations but encompasses all of it, I think, would be rescues humans from hell and then is resurrected. So now that might not make a whole lot of sense if you're used to the Dilbert version of hell, right? Where it's like, hell, why were they in hell? Were they bad people? Were they good people? Why are they in hell? So you have to think a little bit more. So hell is a translation. Obviously, believe it or not, kids, the Bible was not written in English. I know, astonishing.
I thought
and
that King James wrote the Bible, though.
yeah, it just fell out of the sky, and like the King James only Baptists, yeah, they think that. God bless them. I just can't even. So the word for hell and you do sometimes see it just literally in English, Hades. So what does Hades mean? Well, Hades is death. So this is actually this sense of hell the Eastern Orthodox retain much better than anyone in the West, probably because they're referring back to the Greek texts more frequently than people in the West are. Right. So they talk about like eternal death. So to be dead permanently, but somehow still experiencing death continually, which is awful. I mean, it's not like it's a bad place, but it's not necessarily this, you do get fire imagery in the Bible, but you get that in sort of more apocalyptic views of hell. I'm thinking specifically sort of like Revelation.
The lake of fire, right? Everybody remembers the lake of fire, but that's specifically for Satan and or the beast, really, not even Satan and his angels.
And there's this whole Gehenna business, and what does Gehenna mean? It means it's a trash heap outside of Jerusalem where you burn trash, but then what does that mean, right?
But it's a shitty piece of trash. It's not a good fire if it doesn't burn the thing, right? Like this anyway, regardless. Anyhow.
So Hades is death. So I actually would like some time. I'm not saying I want this to be like an approved Bible translation, but I would like some harrowed death. I like that because he harrows Hades, which is also death. So Christ essentially, now whatever this means is up to theologians to debate over. But Christ like destroys death.
Yes.
And that is small o Orthodox. Like that is a Christian belief that Christ in his dying, descending into hell, breaks apart hell, aka death, and then rises again and is physically resurrected. That's very important. So that is the sort of the small o Orthodox Christian belief. What I like about that here, sorry for I love Harrowing of the Hell. The icons of Harrowing of the Hell from Eastern Orthodox tradition are my favorite. It's so great. It's just, I mean, if you've lost any, at the expense of getting a little mushy here, but you know what? All Saints Day is coming up for those of us in the Western calendar. So you think about people whom you've lost. And if you've ever lost somebody you really cared about, death really sucks. It's awful. It's really, really bad. And it stays with you, and it's not great. So the idea of death being destroyed for me is just like, well, yeah, fuck death. Like I want death destroyed. Like I love this. Anyhow, that's my sort of my gushing aside. I love what you did here because sort of you have this idea that well, Christ is being crucified again on the cross of the Enlightenment, but Christ is wont to resurrect. It's kind of what he does. And so I like that, you have this crazy intersectional deconstructionist critical-theoretic Tower of Babbel, which in and of itself is a babbling amount of words. So
exactly.
A lot of things there.
Yes, it's literally a Tower of Babel. If you've read any of the articles in these things, I get it. If you read a science paper or any sufficiently well niched scientific or whatever academic study, it is Babbel to you. But I promise you that the intersectionalist and the queer studies and the deconstruct and all the critical theorists, all of their shit really is kind of babbly. And even though I understand their language now, it's still like, dude, you could have said this so much more simply.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, so you got this Babbel mixture thing, which is it's a tower. It's not a good tower. It does a lot. It's
literally the ivory tower too. Like, oh
yeah, but it cracks because because here we have the resurrected logos. Now, see, this is also a very weird right thing to do because, see, you wrote that as a non-Christian, but logos means something for your tradition that it's not the same as my tradition, but you can use the same word and it can be a meaningful, resonant statement that we can both agree to, even though, Elliott, I'm going to guess that you and I have very different interpretations of what logos means, particularly in the sense of the resurrected logos is harrowing hell. For me, it would be, Christ is harrowing anything that leads towards death, anything that leads towards disorder, to malady, to anything bad, pain, suffering, sorrow. All of those things are a result of, well, sin, which causes death. But in the Christian belief, Christ is the logos incarnate, and he destroys that. I'm certain for you, in your occult tradition, you're going to have a different interpretation. But the point stands that the weird right can get behind the same freaking statement and agree with it, even though we have different interpretations. But we still agree on that.
Right. And kind of the important thing about logos here to me, and this is coming from a purely Christian analysis, by the way, but it's still relevant to occultists as well.
But logos has stuff, but logos has sort of resonance in other sort of types
for sure.
of belief.
Absolutely. And so by logos,
it's originally Greek. So
right. And I mean like the living word, right? In the beginning there was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God.
Yep.
Right. And all things were made by him. Okay, well, and I thought about this for like literally 5 years. I was like, what does it mean for a word to be living? Because communication necessarily requires the words in a certain way to have some sort of stasis. Of course, we know that language changes, blah, 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 all that stuff, and people use language differently, whatever. But the point being is that, like, what does it mean for a word to be living? And it wasn't until I started to think about like the homeostate, like essentially, and certainly with land, it helped a lot. So what is a living word? A living word is one which maintains its own homeostasis. So it's a sort of it's a word which is capable of maintaining its own meaning. And by word, I don't necessarily mean particular, grunt, right, that we make, or a particular like verb, right? But I do mean like a word in terms of like what Muslims call like the word of God, or what Israelites would call the word of God, right? Of like, it's the whole book. So the whole book is sort of self-maintaining, and Christ in himself is a word of God that is self-maintaining, that has creative and restorative power, that is self-resurrecting, right?
Yeah.
And so when I say that the logos, harrows, hell, bookended between God is dead, it is the word of God is self-resurrecting, literally, right?
Elliott, you have the tridium right here. I don't know if you intended that. Maybe you did. You have the death, harrowing, and resurrection. It's not in the same order, but it's right. It's all in there.
Correct. Yeah. This is a tiny little Nicene Creed snippet, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and if I may, just sort of expand on what that, it's got me thinking. So I'll just autistic Lutheran explains things. That's what we'll call this this episode. So in the Lutheran, this is not unique to the Lutheran tradition, but different traditions within the Christian faith put an emphasis on different things, right? We're all autists for different things. Lutherans, when we talk about the word, capital W, obviously coming out of a tradition that was really big on translating the Bible into the vernacular language. Obviously, word is, Christ as the word, of course, right? We're also Christian, yes, but like, how do people experience Christ, right? So people experience Christ in a variety of ways, but one of the ways that Lutherans, at least historically, withholding comments, have really viewed this is by viewing Christ as the living word, capital L, capital W. And that doesn't just mean the words in the Bible, right? It doesn't just mean like the parables of Christ.
Exactly.
Christ is not, from a Christian perspective, Christ is not Lao Tzu, right? Like, he's not just some wise sage person. Obviously he is that, but he's also a lot more than that. And one of the ways that we experience, again, particularly from a Lutheran perspective, the word, as in Christ, is actually through Christ's word read aloud. This is shared by all Abrahamic faiths. The word read aloud. Now, other faiths would not view it as Christ, perhaps, right? But the importance of word read aloud is important, right? Very important in Judaism to have the word read in a certain way at a certain time, right? You have to hear it with like your ears, all this stuff. And obviously, in what little I know about Islam, it has a very similar focus on like the importance of the word. But from a Lutheran perspective, it's not just the word in a book, it's word read aloud, but also the word preached. So what does that mean? Well, that could mean things like, it could mean like a sermon during Sunday. Of course, when you think of word preached, it's sort of like, well, yeah, in church. But it also means basically any time Christ or Christ's love and message is being put out into the world. And so that is also, in a sense, the living word, because it is the message of Christ, which is ultimately Christ, right? Like I always say, the answer is for Christianity, the answer is ultimately because Jesus. It's just it's you go from there. So what does that have to do with principles of the weird? Right. Well, I mean, I think, however you define logos, or at least however we two define, me, Elliott, and I define logos.
Right.
Right. If you want to think about it as it's a homeostasis, it's a self-sustaining word that also includes things like standing in the face of the, I'm going to have to read it here, standing up in the face of the queered, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical theoretic Tower of Babbel, and saying no, and saying actually this thing, actually the logos, actually that thing.
And so to kind of take it, because it's all brilliant and exactly in line with what I'm trying to say here. And so I'll briefly go over the foundations of the queered, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical theoretic, right? Tower of Babbel, crack as the resurrected logos, harrows, hell, right? Here is the deal. Conservatives and general right wingers, right? Is that all of the CRT stuff, all of the critical, all of the Marxist, all of that is the logical conclusion of the Enlightenment. Period. End of story. You don't get one without the other. I'm not saying that you don't get science without the Enlightenment, because I still think you do. But the Enlightenment as the broader philosophical project, eventually this shit happens because of the Enlightenment. And so I'll very quickly do a very brief queered, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical theoretic, right? So the critical theory, the oldest of these terms is deconstructionist, right? The deconstructionists came out of the post-modern movement. And I think this comes out of Foucault mostly, and Derrida. And I'm not going to really go into them because I haven't studied them super deeply. But essentially, if you imagine, you can do a quick thought about this when you think about skepticism, right? If you think skepticism is the highest goal, I should be skeptical of everything, is kind of the statement. Well, I did this when I was younger, when I was 14 or whatever, and I was skeptical of everything. And as I was autistically skeptical of everything, I found myself in this weird dark place briefly where I was like, oh shit, I'm not certain of anything. And then I thought, well, hold on now, I'm certain of one thing, which is skepticism. Right? That's the only thing I'm absolutely certain of right now. So I became skeptical of skepticism. I was able to find my way out of, being a nihilistic skeptic. And this is the problem with people who are skeptical or use these sort of caustic tools, literally caustic tools, is that they never apply the tools to themselves. And therefore, they never notice how the tools deconstruct themselves.
Yeah.
I didn't understand deconstruction, by the way, until I had watched, a bridge that was being literally deconstructed. It wasn't being demolished. It wasn't being, destroyed. It was literally with a crane being reverse constructed. You see what I mean? So that's what deconstruction is carefully taking apart things into their constituent components until you no longer have the original thing.
Right.
So then you have then later on in the kind of leftist sweep of history, right? So essentially, okay, the very brief backpedal just to kind of the modern left originates with Hegel, right? Hegel is a wildly confusing thinker who had a lot of different people. The only disciple of Hegel we care about is Marx. Marx looked at Hegel and said, hey, I can co-opt all of his ideas and make them an economic and materialistic version of his thought. And that's literally what Marxism is. It's just Hegelianism applied to material reality and economics. Great. So Marx came up with this notion of how things ought to be and how we can create the end of history, which is literally, is it the eschaton? Literally the eschaton.
That's a borrowed Judeo-Christian, specifically Christian idea. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So essentially it's literally stripping out God out of the Christianity. When people say Marxism I think Marxism is actually a Christian heresy, unironically. But anyway, point being is that,
Yeah.
When you have Marx, you have a bunch of people within immediately, as soon as Marx started writing this shit down, he was kind of at the right time, right place, where people started to try out Marxism as soon as possible. And Marx actually had some data because he was trying to be quote unquote scientific about his theory. And there was this thing called the French Commune where he's like, okay, we tried this out, didn't work, so we need to update the theory. So the whole notion of the left is to use this Hegelian dialectic, which actually originated in its current form with Kant and is way older than that too. But point being is that the Hegelian dialectic says that you've got a thought, and then you have, once you've created that thought, that sort of creates a line, a dimension of thinking within that thought. And so you have the equal and opposite thought of that thought. And eventually you come to a synthesis that transcends both of them. And synthesis, not in this sort of like zipping together, but more of a synthesis of finding an abstract thing that explains both the thought and the anti-thought. This is frequently called the thesis, antithesis, antithesis, right? And synthesis, right? Regardless, point being is that, so there's this dialectical notion on the left that they are totally okay with throwing shit at the wall and see what sticks, what doesn't stick, right? And then synthesizing a new, different way. Critical theory is exactly that version, because you'll notice that lefties talk about in terms of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. They're purposefully calling out the steps in the dialectic that it took to get there. So, they're actually saying we are in this full line and that we're adapting this full line. We're not like some sort of new radical break from the previous lines on purpose. That's a purposeful thing. So anyway, point being is that you get to the post-Soviet and post-Maoist eras, and basically the Western left is in total fucking chaos, because they're like, holy shit, literally every single time we tried communism at scale, it resulted in actual genocide. Like, what do we do from here? Because we tried Marxism, we tried Leninism in Russia, we tried Marxist Leninism, Maoism. None of this shit is actually working. What do we do? You know, a lot of people who are kind of the Trotskyite persuasion ran off and became neocons. Some people, doubled down on the Maoism and said, you know what, we just need to Maoism harder. Other people started becoming the postmodernists that we know, and they were trying to find ways to move forward in Marxism. So many of the postmodernists are ex-Marxists who are like disillusioned with the Marxist-Leninist program and trying to figure out a way of resurrecting it themselves. Now, the thing is, not a lot to call postmodernism neo-Marxist is not technically correct, although many people who read postmodernists are neo-Marxists because they're just trying to pick up the weapons and not really the weapons of deconstructionism without really engaging with the actual philosophy, right? So critical theory was sort of the first. Okay, so critical doesn't mean what you think in terms of critical thinking, in terms of thinking really hard, basically, right? Critical theory means to criticize, which goes all the way back to Hegel, and indeed even further back to occultism, because Hegel is literally just occultism applied to the Enlightenment, right? Which is why everybody can hate the Enlightenment, right? So he said that the universe is fundamentally good, and all we need to do is strip away the evil. And it's greatly simplifying, but strip away the evil and then we'll get to the good, right? And so that's why the leftist criticism method is not to construct a new working theory, but to deconstruct by criticizing, in a theoretical sense, critical theory, the current structures of power, so that we can get to the real, genuine humanity underneath all of this fake shit that we have layered on top of it, all this fake hierarchy we layered on top of it. So the problem is, once you start deconstructing in a critical sense, everybody turns against each other. So the critical theorists and the deconstructionists had this fucking huge problem that they were causing the left to fracture in every direction. So the intersectionalists came in and said, hey, actually, hierarchy has, oppression has a hierarchy, right? So they noticed that, and this was some of the first critical race theorists, they said, hey, Black women are marginalized or oppressed on both the dimension of woman and the dimension of Black, because, so consider a factory, Black men can get work on the factory floor, and white women can get work being typists, but Black women are going to be discriminated against because they're not men, and so they can't work on the floor, and they're going to be discriminated by being an admin in the typist, so they'll end up not being typists either because they're Black. So they're discriminated on two different angles, and those angles intersect at a point, or those two bubbles in a Venn diagram intersect, and so on and so forth. So this gave a way for the left to stack rank their oppression, and this is what you think about in oppression Olympics. That's intersectionality. Now the problem is this creates a hierarchy, and the left can't fucking have hierarchies because they're anti-hierarchy. So the last piece of this is the queer piece, because to queer things is to then go and knock at the notion of hierarchy by destroying the notion of categorization entirely, right? So what we have right now in the modern, quote, woke left is the queered, right? Like in the terms of a verb, intersectional, deconstructionist, critical-theoretic Tower of Babbel. That is the modern left, woke left, it precisely called out.
Yep. Very nicely said. Epic rants. Let's try to start tying it together as best we can. Obviously, this is just a sort of hey, we had this idea, we kind of worked on it. We're sort of dropping some teasers, trailers, sort of the general idea. We looked at this one principle of it that we, and obviously there's a whole, a list, not a manifesto. It's just a list. Open letter. Yeah. That we were working on. But yeah, I think this serves as like a really good long, but hopefully some people are still hanging around here. Hello. But intro to this idea. Again, we're dropping our kind of our sense of what the weird right might be, and so it's an intro, and it's maybe a little bit longer for an intro, but that's okay, because this is like, there's a lot of, again, people on the right, you got to haggle, fight over definitions. It's part of it. That you quite nicely summed up really the state of the modern, at least the sort of the maybe not the old school leftists, but like the modern woke left 100%.
Right, the woke leftist, because the old school left is more new atheism plus new atheism, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's it for this one.
I'd be kind of dropping it off, but I kind of
get it now.
I feel like that's kind of like a good place to end right there.
Yep, that's it.
Elliott, anything that you'd like to let people know about, where they can find you, do things? Obviously, we're busy working on this stuff. This will be put into writing at some point. We're working through it right now. But anything you want to let people know about, Elliott? Anything like that? Doesn't have to be.
No, this is basically the current project that I'm working on with you. This has been really great the last at least couple days. We've been really, so this is one of the most intense bullet points. My kind of bullet points that are like Landian versions are of course like really ridiculously compact. We have some much easier bullet points, like existence is better than non-existence. So it's not a complete like ridiculous.
We try to manage the pretension just a little bit. Yeah, well, I actually recently, I blog occasionally for carpeforum.com, and I just wrote an article actually based on our Peace in the Feud episode. I sort of distilled it down into a kind of fun, zany, goofy blog, highly referential, highly hyper real, memes and GIFs and shit embedded into the blog article, and the article's been well received. So if any of you did enjoy the Peace in the Feud episode, I'll link to it here. I wrote sort of a quick little blog version of that. I literally
was a guest on the Peace in the Feud episode, and I still enjoyed the article.
There you go. See, Somebody enjoys it. Okay, cool. We'll leave it there, and we'll be back probably pretty soon. Probably going to do more weird right stuff. Yeah, and so everyone have a great weekend. Have a happy Halloween. Watch something scary and fight against nothingness. All right, I'll let everyone go. Take it easy, everyone. Peace.